Hello and welcome to Herstory episode 4. I'm running out of fingers. Episode 4. I've had to move back because it's terribly sunny. Lovely to be so sunny. In fact, I'm going to take my socks off. Woo! Throw caution to the wind. There we go. Got a can of Coke on the go. Crack the window open. If you can hear any heavy panting at any time, don't worry, there's not something dodgy going on. I'm looking after my friend's dog. She's a chocolate lab. She's absolutely gorgeous, but she pants really loudly all the time. Let's have a bit of bird song instead. So today, who are we talking about today? I hear you ask. Well, I didn't know about this lady until yesterday, and I'm really pleased I did. So I said to my partner night before last, who's your favourite woman from history? And he ummed and ahed about it for a really long time. And then he said, Nero's poisoner woman. Like, what? And he said, yeah, she was a contract killer for Emperor Nero, and she ended up starting her own school for poisoners. And I was like, right, I'm sold. I'm going to research this woman. And it turns out such a woman did exist. Her name was Locusta. And she did exactly what she said on the tin. Let me get my little notes up. I wrote tons and tons of pages on this woman, because although there's not a great deal known about her life, what is known is really, really fascinating. So here we go. Locusta, spelt like locust with an A on the end. A notorious maker of poisons in the 1st century Roman Empire. Supposedly took part in the assassinations of Emperor Claudius and Britannicus. Was a favourite of Emperor Nero, a hired assassin, and set up her own school for poisoners. So she achieved a lot in her fairly short life. We don't know when she was born, but we know she was from peasant stock, and she was from Gaul in an area near the French Alps. Somehow she made her way to Rome, where she realised that her herbal skills from her Celtic upbringing could possibly net her a fair bit of money in Roman society. Smart lady. She served as a poisons expert under Agrippina the Younger, who needs an episode all for herself, as does Agrippina the Older, and lots of other Roman women. In AD 54, she was already notorious, and she was already in prison on poisoning charges. The Empress Agrippina calls Locusta to her and orders her to supply poison for her husband Claudius in return for a reprieve. So you give me poison to off my husband and I will let you go. So Locusta's like, alright, this is what I do. This is my thing. So what she did was supply belladonna, which was sprinkled on mushrooms. Not those type of mushrooms, just regular everyday mushrooms. That Claudius was really keen on mushrooms for some reason. And it was given to him by his food taster Halotus, which is a really unfortunate name. Halitosis. For someone tasting your food. But anyway, the poison didn't work as intended. So what she'd done was she'd knocked out the bodyguards, she'd gotten the food tester on side, but there wasn't enough belladonna on the mushrooms in order to make it work and kill him efficiently. It just made him feel really rough. So what they would do in this circumstance, he was quite often prone to overindulgence, and what they would do is his physician would get a feather, stick it down his throat to make him vomit so that he could eat more, which is weird. So they did that. He called for his doctor. His name was Gaius Statinius Xenophon. So 3 words, three names. And he was on side as well, and she covered the feather with strychnine. He then put the strychnine feather down his throat, and that finished him off, basically. Agrippina didn't do what she said she was going to do. She immediately fell under suspicion for poisoning her husband. So she said, no, it wasn't me. It was that poisoned woman, Locusta. And she got thrown back in jail, which was kind of crappy on Agrippina's part. But that woman was a Terminator. We will get to her in her very own episode. So in AD 55, she's still in prison. Locusta is called upon by Agrippina's son, the Emperor Nero, to marry Claudius's son, Britannicus. So basically, Claudius's son, Britannicus, is about to come of age so he can be emperor. And Nero doesn't want him to be emperor. He wants to be emperor. So he wants this young boy offed, and he goes to Locusta and says, can you get rid of him for me, please? And this time, I promise I will pardon you. So this poison, they tried various different methods. They tried various different things like hemlock and nightshade and even opium. And this kid had quite a high tolerance for drugs. And when this poison was slow to work and not often effective, it just made him quite ill. Nero supposedly flogged Locusta with his own hands and threatened her with execution if the next batch of poison didn't work. So she quickly supplied a far more effective poison, which got the job done. Now, in ancient Rome, wine was served hot, and all wine was tasted. What they would do is they would cool the wine down with water. So Britannicus's wine was made slightly hotter than usual. It was tasted by his taste tester. Yes, fine. Oh, bit hot, but no poison. You're fine. And then when he called for the water to cool the wine down, nobody bothered to check that the water wasn't poisoned. So when he began to convulse on the floor, Nero simply said, oh, don't worry about him. He's epileptic. Don't worry about it. He needs to be left alone and he needs to rest while he's having a seizure. So Nero ordered him taken away to rest so as not to disturb the other diners. And he very quickly died, and he was buried overnight very suspiciously. And yeah, it was all a bit hush hush. This 14-year-old boy, just off you go. So Nero did reward her with a full pardon, large country estates, and it was on one of these large country estates that she set up the school for poisoners, and Nero sent pupils there to her to learn her craft. So Locusta became known as an agent of death by poison. She got contracts and assignments freelance. So this is for the next 14 years after Nero has pardoned her. She charged exorbitant rates to private clients. And she had a clause in her contract with them that if she were to ever be caught doing their business for them, they had to get her out of jail by hook or by crook. So for some reason, she always did manage to stay out of jail with these very important and influential people on her side to back her up and get her out. So yeah, she's freelance. She became the first state-funded female contract killer and named the Imperial Poisoner, which is quite a cool name. Her arsenal included hemlock, belladonna, nightshade, arsenic, quinine, opium, strychnine, and even cyanide. She tested all her poisons on animals to assure their effectiveness, and Nero also sent her condemned prisoners and slaves to test on at the School of Poisoning, which was very nice. She'd studied herb law all her life, and she took it really seriously, took it as a calling. She taught one of Rome's other great female poisoners, Martina, who killed Germanicus. That's another story in itself. But she trained the best of the best in terms of poisoners, basically. Nero, though, was not the most beloved of emperors. I'm sure you've heard. He made public appearances as an actor, a poet, a musician, and generally did not act according to his status. He rose taxes, which is never a good idea. He was having a public affair with a slave girl. Her name was Claudia Acti. Let's give the woman her name. He had his own mother killed. As I say, that's another episode in herself. That woman was like Rasputin. She was a Terminator. It took like 6 attempts to kill her. He had a sham marriage to one of his male servants, Pythagoras, not maths, triangles, Pythagoras, different Pythagoras. He was already married, but he had another sham marriage with one of his chums. And then, of course, there was the Great Fire of Rome, which burned for well over a week. And there's a rumour that has gone down in history that he played the fiddle while Rome burned because he just did not care whatsoever. We've got a car. So a rumour went round that Nero had actually started the fire as well. Nero blamed the Christians. He had the Christians executed quite brutally. And costs to rebuild Rome meant even higher taxes. Again, doesn't make people very happy. So because they were in a bit of an economic crisis, he devalued the Roman currency. And he generally acted like a complete twit. Conspiracies sprung up against him, of course. Anyone suspected of being involved in a conspiracy against him was ordered to commit suicide in front of him. Lovely. He supposedly kicked his mistress to death when he found out she was pregnant. Really nice guy. This is unverified, but it's a really nice guy. You're getting the right picture here. So in 68 AD, the Senate declares that Nero, so sick of Nero. He declares Nero a political enemy and sent men to apprehend him. So Nero goes on the run. And before he goes on the run, he goes to his old mate Locusta and he says to her, "Can I have some poison to take with me?" And she says, "Yes, of course you can, darling. You've been wonderful to me." And she gives him some poison in a little gold box so that he can take it if he needs to, rather than being apprehended. For some reason, he either lost it, forgot it, don't know what. And when he was apprehended, he stabbed himself. I'm not sure which would be the preferable way to go, really. I choose neither. Then what? Yes, after Nero's suicide, Locusta was condemned to die by the new emperor Galba. Her fate goes one of two ways, and they're both quite different. So one theory goes she was publicly raped by a specially trained giraffe and then torn apart by wild animals. Or there's the other, more plausible theory that she was led through the streets in chains, a la Cersei Lannister, shame, 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 and was executed outside the city walls. Much more likely, I would say. But you can choose. You can choose which version you prefer, because for some reason those are the two that have gone down in history. So there we go, and that was the end of Locusta. So Tacitus described her as the female Locusta, a woman lately condemned as a dealer in clandestine practices but reserved among the instruments of state to serve the purposes of dark ambition. I like that description very, very much. So yeah, Locusta is credited with being the world's first female serial killer. Although she did it for money, not really for pleasure, but yeah, certainly the first to achieve infamy anyway. Yes, under Nero's reign, Locusta extended her pleasure of killing people, poisoning victims at her will and for a cost, and becoming a sorceress of clandestine practices. Mysterious. We don't know what that means. She was dabbling in alchemy and stuff. Nero issued contracts to her to kill his rivals, and in return lavished her with gifts, land, money, and a full pardon for everything she did. So while Nero was around, life was sweet for Locusta. But when Nero fell, she fell hard too. So her story is a short one. There's not a lot known about her. We don't know when she was born. We don't know where exactly she was born. We barely know anything about this remarkable woman. And yet her story is so deeply fascinating. She was the Imperial poisoner of Rome. That's a really cool title. Now, we're not just talking about, when we do Herstory, we're not just talking about kick-butt women from history who achieved good things. We're talking about kick-butt women in history in general, women who deserve to have their story told, who you perhaps might not have heard of before. And I certainly had not heard of Locusta until my other half mentioned it. So thank you very much, Darren, for introducing me to Locusta and for getting me looking into Roman history. I've been leafing through some of my old BBC history magazines, and I found a lot of very cool Roman women to look at. Livia, Octavia, Agrippina the Elder and the Younger, Julia the Elder, and Messalina. And I am particularly interested. There's a very small mention of this one woman here, and her name is the notorious Sempronia, who was witty, educated, and charming, as well as adept at using her sexuality. The historian Sallust was disgusted by the way she lied and pursued men. There was nothing she held so cheap as her virtue and chastity, he moralized. I need to find out more about this woman. She sounds like my type of gal. Anyway, signing off for episode 4 of Herstory. I hope you have enjoyed Liz and Mulan and Joan of Arc so far, and Locusta. As always, suggestions in the little comments box below as to who you would like me to feature on my next episode of Herstory. I put new videos out every Friday, and please like and subscribe and all that good stuff, because apparently it's all about the subscribers. So yeah, much appreciated. Thank you for joining me on this little journey, and hopefully you will go away and find out lots more about Locusta and tell me more cool stuff that I didn't know already. All right, I will see you next week. Bye.